Runic Dark Magician is by far the most difficult variant of Dark Magician I have tested, but it's also very rewarding. The skill gap required to see success with this deck is pretty sizable. In this video, I just hope to shine some light on how to play the deck through various test hands. Full disclaimer, these test hands were recorded a few weeks ago, and the deck used in this video is identical to the one showcased in my first video of 2024. Since then, the deck has seen some revision, and there will be new videos and new ideas in the near future going over those revisions. We'll start off the first test hand by drawing into our copy of Runic Destruction, 2 copies of Magician's Souls, Soul Servant, and Timaeus the United Dragon. Here, just right away, we are trying to get Dragoon out as fast as possible while generating some sort of advantage any way we can. We'll activate Magician's Souls to summon our copy of Dark Magician. And what we'll do now is we haven't used the normal summon yet, so perfect time to normal summon Souls, pitching our copy of Soul Servant to draw 1 card. We unfortunately drew into the worst card in our deck, which isn't the end of the world because we'll be able to pitch Dark Magician Girl off Timaeus, making our Soul Servant live. Drawing us 2 cards, we will activate Timaeus' effect to essentially summon our copy of Dragoon. The 2 cards we drew into were Instant Fusion and Runic Freezing Curses. The beautiful thing about Instant Fusion in this case is that Instant Fusion can summon our Hugin. Hugin will activate its effect, pitching our copy of Runic Destruction because Freezing Curses is the more important one in case we get stopped here, to grab our copy of Runic Fountain. The beautiful thing here is we can activate Runic Fountain and simply pass our turn. However, what we want to do is we want to push this board a little bit further. So we'll activate Runic Freezing Curses to summon out Runic Gary to essentially trigger our fountain and get the draw 2. Now, what we could have done is simply save the fountain draws and save the fountain draws and save the freezing curses as a follow-up interruption. But we decided to extend our board here and extend our game state. The beautiful thing now is that we can link summon our Magician Souls and our Gary into an SP Little Knight. The beautiful thing here now is essentially what we have set up is an SP Banish, we have a Dragoon Negate, and we have Hugin Protection. Not only that, but we also have a Runic Destruction, which can add as further interruptions on our opponent's turn. That being said, Runic Fountain will also trigger on the Destruction, giving us an extra card in hand. That's 3 disruptions, assuming we don't draw anything off the Runic Destruction, because if we draw something after activating Runic Destruction, we essentially get, if we drew another Runic card, it's an additional interruption. In addition to this, we kind of fumbled the bag with that last draw because we drew into the Dark Magician. The Dark Magician is a dead card. Now imagine if these were 2 Runic cards. You essentially just see the idea of snowballing these constant interruptions, which is why this deck is so effective. Our opening hand is Runic Tip, Runic Slumber, Magician Souls, Runic Fountain, and Runic Destruction. We're going to start off by activating our copy of Runic Tip to grab our copy of Runic Freezing Curses. In this test hand, we are actually going to go for the very greedy route. There's different ways you can play this test hand, but we're going to go as greedy as possible to maximize the most amount of Runic names we have engraved. So we activating a Runic card, it doesn't matter which one, we're going to be using Freezing Curses here to essentially summon our copy of Runic Hugin, and Hugin is going to get us our second copy of Runic Fountain in hand. Remember, Runic Fountain is not going to be a once per turn, so essentially here we're going to be drawing as many cards as humanly possible. Normally we're supposed to be activating Runic Fountain here to essentially get a draw 3 right away, and then we have more cards to progress our game state further. But, you know, with no interruptions here, nothing to kind of play against us, we're going to kind of see where we can push this hand. So we're going to be activating our Fountain, then activating Runic Slumber, and Fountain will trigger, essentially targeting 3 Runic cards, 3 Runic names in grave, putting them to the bottom of the deck, and we're going to draw 3 random cards. We drew into Dark Magician, Illusion of Chaos, and Magician Souls. And now essentially what we have is our entire Dark Magician engine. Magician Souls will pitch our copy of Dark Magician Girl to summon our copy of Magician Souls. And now what we'll do is we are going to essentially activate Magician Souls effect to pitch our copy of Runic Fountain and our Magician Souls to draw 2 extra cards. These draw into more Runic names, which is further disruptions on our opponent's turn. Illusion of Chaos will grab our copy of Timaeus so that we can make Dragoon ultimately. Putting back our Illusion of Chaos, we can now free to be activating Timaeus effect, tributing our copy of Magician Souls, summoning Timaeus, and here we just make our standard Dragoon line of play. Before ending our turn, we're just going to activate Soul Servant in graveyard because we have Dark Magician and Dark Magician Girl. We're essentially going to be able to draw 2 cards, drawing back the Illusion of Chaos we put to the top of the deck to have follow-up for next turn. We'll activate our Runic Fountain, and here we'll proceed to simply end phase. We have 3 Runic names in hand, Dragoon on board, and Hugin on board to protect the fountain. Now, this doesn't look like a crazy end board just from a board stance. However, we have 4 interruptions here, 5 if you count a Hugin, and a draw 3. So here, theoretically, we'll just play it out. We'll use Runic Freezing Curses to essentially, as an interruption, Destruction as an additional interruption. Runic Fountain can activate, targeting the 3 Runic names in grave we have to draw an extra 3 cards. Here, now we have another Dragoon Negate, and we have 5 cards in hand to essentially start our next turn. And that's kind of the way this deck snowballs its advantage. And essentially what it allows us to do is trade 1-for-1 interactions better, or at least on par with what our opponent hits us with. Not only that, but it also allows us to generate enough follow-up on the crackback so that we can essentially take over the game state, dwindle our opponent's resources, and essentially out-resource our opponent to a victory. A hand of 2 Soul Servants, Magician's Rod, Illusion of Chaos, and Runic Slumber showcases the amount of draw power this deck actually has. And essentially what this particular hand's going to do is it's going to try to showcase how well this deck can actually dig through its deck to draw into more runic cards, draw into combo pieces, and more engine to essentially advance your game state and win the resource matchup, which is something that Dark Magician actually struggles to do drastically. So we'll activate Magician Souls, sending our copy of Dark Magician Girl, summoning Magician Souls in this situation. And now what we want to do is kind of get the Soul Servants live in grave. So we'll activate Magician Souls, pitching Soul Servant, chaining the other copy of Soul Servant to stack our Dark Magician. Dark Magician will draw into because of the Magician Souls effect. And now what we'll have access to is we have access to Secrets of Dark Magic, fusing Rod and Dark Magician into the Dark Magicians. Now what Dark Magician and Soul Servant Engrave allow us to do is just draw 3 cards and progress our game state even further than what we have. We drew into Runic Tip and Runic Slumber and another copy of Magician's Rod for potential follow-up. Runic Tip will add us not Runic Fountain, but Runic Destruction. The reason being is we want to fill up our graveyard as much as possible to facilitate more draws off Runic Fountain. We'll activate Destruction to summon our Hugin pitching our Slumber to grab our copy of Runic Fountain. Now what this will allow us to do is essentially activate Runic Fountain, and with the other Runic Slumber in hand, remember we didn't activate Runic Slumber, we pitched it, so that Runic Slumber is live. We're going to target, doesn't matter what we target here, we'll target our Magician Souls. Runic Fountain will now trigger and we'll draw 3 more cards from our deck. Here, all we're banking on is drawing an extra Runic card for future interruptions, and we did. We drew into Runic Destruction, which is fantastic. Obviously, we drew into 2 Illusion of Chaos, which does kind of suck. But what's going to happen here is now we have enough bodies to make an SP Little Knight. Now, what I was saying is, like, if you drew into better Runic cards, Destruction isn't really that great unless you're playing, you know, Labyrinth or back row heavy decks. But theoretically in this situation, we'll just activate Destruction. This is on our opponent's turn. We'll pass turn here. We'll activate Destruction on our opponent's turn. We'll trigger Fountain, and now we'll draw 2 cards. Here, we drew into another Runic Destruction, and Dark Magician will trigger, grabbing our Fountain. Runic Tip, Runic Tip can add us another Runic card to grab another Disruption on our opponent's turn. Pair this with SP Little Knight. And now we didn't draw optimally, drawing into the Illusion of Chaos and Magician Souls. However, that is follow-up on our turn if needed, right? And these are just like endless disruptions if we drew more and more Runic cards. But with an SP Banish and the Dark Magician draws, we're just generating more and more engine on our turn to overtake the game state, while the Runic cards do everything they can to limit our opponent's plays. During the deck profile, I was very adamant on why I thought Instant Fusion had a lot of synergy with Runic. And this is a perfect example of what it is. Obviously, this test hand isn't that fantastic, but I do want to showcase how awesome this interaction is. We'll activate Runic Tip to grab our copy of Runic Slumber, which does protect from, destruction by card effects. So we'll activate our other runic card to summon our Hugin. Hugin will essentially grab our copy of Runic Fountain. By pitching a card in hand, we'll pitch here Magician Souls because we can normal summon Rod, and what Rod will do is get us access back to that Magician Souls. Here what we'll do is we'll activate Instant Fusion. We don't have another runic name that we need to summon, but we can summon Millennium Eyes Restrict. Now this is the beautiful thing about this card, because now we can activate Runic Fountain, normal summoning our Rod to get our copy of Soul Servant, which will allow us to stack our deck when we activate that final Runic Slumber. Now here we'll activate Runic Slumber, targeting our Millennium Eyes Restrict. Now the beautiful thing about Runic Slumber in this situation is Runic Slumber protects Millennium Eyes Restricts from the Instant Fusion destruction effect. In the end phase, Instant Fusion wants to destroy Millennium Eyes Restrict, but Slumber will protect it, giving you an extra interruption on your opponent's turn. With Runic Slumber activated, Runic Fountain will trigger. We'll target our 3 runic cards, chaining our copy of Soul Servant. Soul Servant will want to stack Illusion of Chaos, simply to manipulate our hand any further if needed. So we'll target our 3 runic cards and put them to the bottom of the deck, stacking our Illusion of Chaos, drawing 3 cards. Now what we essentially will do is Illusion of Chaos will activate, because we drew into the Dark Magicians. Here we can grab our copy of Timaeus the United Dragon if needed. Typically here, if we didn't draw into that Dark Magician, we'd probably go into Souls and just try to draw into more combo pieces. But since we drew Timaeus the United Dragon, this is great. We could just pitch our Rod, summoning Timaeus, fusing into Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. Now we'll activate Soul Servant Engrave, essentially banishing it to draw the 1 card as a Dragoon Negate fodder. Plus we have a Millennium Eyes Restrict that stays on our opponent's turn as an additional interruption, and we drew into a runic card which can be used as interruption. That will not only destroy something or interact with our opponent at all, but then it will trigger Fountain on our opponent's turn, drawing into another card. In this case, we drew into a runic name, which is even more interruptions. So just here alone, we had 4 interruptions, a draw 1, and in addition, here's another amazing part, is that now Instant Fusion will try to trigger again to destroy Millennium Eyes Restrict, and we could use Hugin to protect Millennium Eyes Restrict. And that's why Millennium Eyes Restrict, I think, is just so awesome in this particular variant, and it just has so much utility with this particular list, in combination with Runic Slumber and Hugin and things like that. Pair that with the Dragoon Negate, and it applies a lot of pressure and a very difficult board for your opponent to interact with. In this final test hand, I'll just be showcasing Visa Starfrost and its kind of utility in this list. I know it caught a lot of people off guard, and this test hand will kind of clear a lot of the reasoning behind it up. I think Visa Starfrost in this particular list allows for the ceiling of the Dark Magician lines of play to really take off. In addition, it allows us to access a Synchro toolbox otherwise not really available for Dark Magician. Here we just activate a Runic Tip, grabbing a Runic Slumber, normal summoning Magician's Rod to grab our Soul Servant to essentially allow us to stack our deck when our Fountain resolves. So here we'll just activate our copy of Runic Slumber to summon Gary, and now what we can do is essentially gives us access to that level 4 to access that Synchro toolbox through Visa Starfrost. Here Runic Fountain will target our 2 runic cards Engrave, attempting to resolve. Soul Servant will activate. Now we could change Soul Servant to that activation of Runic Fountain, stacking our copy of Secrets of Dark Magic to essentially give us access to the Dark Magicians. We have souls in hand. We drew into the Dark Magical Circle as our other card. It doesn't really matter in this case. This is just like extra, see the top card of your deck and manipulate it for the Dark Magicians, but here it doesn't really matter. Anyways, we'll activate Souls, summoning Dark Magician, fusing it with the Magician's Rod to summon the Dark Magicians. Here what we can do is we can activate Dark Magical Circle, essentially seeing the top 3 cards of our deck. We drew into Illusion of Chaos and 2 rods, And what we can do is just stack it, manipulate it for the Dark Magicians to draw one card, and we drew into the Illusion of Chaos, which is actually really cool in this situation because it can give us access to Dragoon later on. Here, Visa Starfrost can activate, destroying the Dark Magicians. Here, when the Dark Magicians is destroyed, it allows us to special summon Dark Magician and Dark Magician Girl. Visa's requires destruction in order for itself to summon, which is really, really interesting. And it kind of allows us to access more bodies on board, which is really, really great. In addition to this, because we have Soul Servant Engrave, it gives us access to the draw 2. Here we can synchro summon into either Chaos Angel, but we're gonna go with the negation of Baron de Flor. Going second, Chaos Angel is the better option, but we go into Baron de Flor in this situation. We'll activate Soul Servant. We drew into another copy of Runic Fountain and Runic Freezing Curses or Destruction. I can't see from here. Doesn't really matter. Here we'll just activate Illusion of Chaos, grabbing our copy of Timaeus the United Dragon. However, this is where the game state gets very, very interesting. What we can do is we can essentially summon another body on board with the Runic card to progress our plays even further. Remember, Baron also has a destruction effect, and the Dark Magicians isn't once per turn. So let's kind of see the situation we could play out here. What we can do now is we could activate our copy of Runic Destruction to summon our copy of Hugin. Hugin doesn't need to activate its effect here because we already have the fountain in hand, which is okay. But what we can do is we can essentially link these three off into a Selene. If we're going second, we could activate Dark and go into Selene in a much easier way. But for the time being, we could just activate Selene, summoning our copy of the Dark Magicians. And now what we can do is kind of progress our game state even further. We can activate Runic Fountain over our other copy of Runic Fountain to allow Dark Magicians to draw an extra card. It doesn't matter what it is in this situation, but what we can have now is we have access to SP Little Knight and Dragoon. Baron de Flor can pop our Dark Magicians, activating its effect again. And what this allows us to do is summon our copy of Dark Magician and Dark Magician Girl for the second time this turn, giving our board so many different bodies to work with. And now what we can do is we can activate Timaeus the United Dragon, sending our copy of Dark Magical Circle, fusing itself and Dark Magician to make our Dragoon. In addition to this, what we have access to here is Dark Magician Girl and Selene can also be made into an SP Little Knight. Now, obviously here we didn't draw into enough runic names to progress our game state even further, because say the Illusion of Chaos was another runic name, or our hands were, our draws off the runic cards were a little more optimal, we'd be able to have runic cards in hand with this kind of board. This is bare minimum. We have 3 interruptions, we have 2 negates, one of them is a destruction, in addition an SP banish, which is really, really strong. In addition to this, say if we did draw into runic cards, we'd be so much further ahead. And that's it for the video. That's all I have to showcase you guys today. I want to bring this deck to more live duels, giving you guys a more in-depth example of what I mean when this deck wants to trade 1-for-1 interactions, because ultimately a deck like Runic and Runic Dark Magician specifically, there isn't really, it's not a deck that's build your end board type of deck. It's not like a build my end board, good luck breaking it. I'm not setting up Village, I'm not setting up Winda and things like that. What I'm doing here is essentially establishing a game state where the deck can function and out-resource our opponents by trading 1-for-1 interactions. And essentially that's kind of where this deck's ceiling wants to be, and that's why I think this deck can be very, very effective. So for the time being, I just want to thank everyone for watching. Thank you so much for the endless support. I can't wait to produce more videos. And the amazing part about this list is that this list is even more refined now than it was at the time of recording this video. So I can't wait to showcase my new ideas in future videos to come. In the meantime, I want to thank you for watching and have a great day.